Texas is the latest media target for the irresponsible way we are opening up our economy and putting lives at risk. They tried this with Georgia already when they opened up the few hair salons at limited capacity, including quite possibly the greatest headline in media panic history: Georgia's experiment in human sacrifice. Gotta love the Atlantic for that one. That one doesn't seem to be working out so well as a prediction per se. So the media has moved on to Texas and its Republican governor, Greg Abbott, most definitely not to Colorado, and its Democratic governor, Jared Polis, who has had his stay-at-home order expire 4 days before Texas, and who's had 4 times the death rate as Texas, but Texas is the one with the problem. Their argument is that Texas opened up its economy a couple weeks ago, and now they're hitting all-time highs in new cases. It shows how horrible that idea was. All right, there's 3 points I'd like to make today. Number 1, it's not really true. Texas isn't hitting all-time highs in the number of new cases. Number 2, even if it was true, the much talked about opening of the economy had nothing to do with it. And number 3, CNN is horrible. Let's start with point 1. Is Texas actually seeing a lot of new cases since the economy has opened? Here's CNN to scare you about it.
Texas is seeing its highest number of new coronavirus cases and its highest number of deaths just 2 weeks after it officially reopened. Look at the numbers here. According to the Texas Health and Human Services, the state added 1,448 new cases yesterday. That's the biggest daily increase on record. Texas also saw 58 deaths from coronavirus compared to just 25 the day before. The nation's third largest state is now a case study.
This whole segment is a case study in something, that's for sure. Sean Trendy at Real Clear Politics ran the numbers, and at a quick glance, sure, the caseload is increasing. But why are those numbers going up, would be the question. Well, by all appearances, it is simply because they are testing a lot more people in Texas. If you look back about a month, the daily cases have increased by about 30% since then. Sure, that's true. But they're now testing 3 times the amount of people per day than they were a month ago. When you test 200% more people and you only get a 30% increase in positive tests, that's a good thing. If what I'm saying is true, of course, you could check my work, you would get a decrease in the percentage of people testing positive. And what do you know? We've got one where about a month or so ago, about 13% of tests were coming back positive. Now it's just 5%. This is good news. Now, I will put a slight asterisk next to the part of the story here where we're talking about good news based on this report from the Texas Observer. It claims that Texas is including antibody tests in their total test count. If true, Texas should stop doing that immediately and separate out the data. Including these tests could theoretically lower the positive test percentage, and it could increase the total amount of positives with cases that are already resolved. It doesn't make any sense. It would hurt our understanding of whether a breakout is actually happening. In other words, it totally screws up the data, so stop doing it if it's happening. No one has really any idea if the inclusion is happening a lot or rarely or really at all, and that's the problem. And knowing more detail about data is always helpful. It's something CNN could benefit from. For example, let's look at Tarrant County. This is in Texas, just outside of Dallas. You can see a gigantic spike recently, and I will admit it looks really bad. Big, scary blue bar graphs rising like little skyscrapers kind of above the rest of the city. This county has had the 3rd most cases in the entire state. It's a big factor in those total case count numbers going up. But the 2 spikes are explained right underneath the graph on the site that the government provides where the small print lives. It says, quote, 423 cases reported on May 10th and 153 reported on May 13th, 2020 are from a federal prison outbreak. Now, people in federal prison are still people, and they should count toward the total. But I find it pretty difficult to believe that these federal inmates caught their COVID at the local salon or cafe. Is it possible somebody sneezed really hard out the window and it carried all the way to the prison? I mean, I guess, but, call me a skeptic on that one. Even if it were true, however, it still wouldn't show a recent increase in the cases. Why? Quote, Tarrant County's latest tally of COVID-19 cases includes 423 people who tested positive at the federal prison known, with a really weird name, as the Federal Medical Center, Fort Worth. The cases have existed for some time, but were just officially factored in. So the cases were reported last week, but didn't occur last week. And even if they did, they happened in prison, not at a restaurant. But other than that, the media is doing a great job. Regardless, even if there was a big increase right now, it would not be because of the governor's order to open up the economy. The media has these ridiculous ideas about government power. And they're tiny little noggins. Everyone's going around like normal, and then the governor says, stay at home, and they all go stay at home. And then they stay at home and stay at home and stay at home, and then the governor one day says, go back to work, and everyone goes back to work. If you are afflicted by this same belief, go back and watch our show last week, helpfully titled, Stu Does Elon Musk, which doesn't necessarily tell you that's what we were talking about. In fact, it sounds like a terrible film. You don't want to see that film if it comes out. It shows, though, I think this episode shows definitively that this is not how the world works. You can find all the shows, by the way, going back on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search for Stu, and I'll be the first one there. Watch everything for free. But to show you what I'm talking about, this is a chart of Texas illustrating how people stopped going to work in the pandemic. In February and early March, everyone's kind of doing their normal thing. Then everyone kind of stops going to work pretty quickly because of our good old buddy, Mr. COVID. Now, let me show you where the governor instituted his stay-at-home order. And if you've been following this show, you know right about where this marker is going to go. And remember that. You watch this show, you know the answers before they pop up on the screen. And I love you for that. The governor's order happened after almost everyone had already stopped going to work. And then later on, the governor announced an opening after people had already started trickling back in. At the very bottom, there was a drop-off of about 47% of workers stopping their commutes every day. During the lockdown, about 7% of those came back to work. But what the media wants you to believe is it's not that 7% that would cause a problem, because you can't blame the Republican governor for those. He had a stay-at-home order in place after all. Instead, you have to create panic and generate hate clicks against Greg Abbott by trying to convince people that it's the additional 3% of people that have left home since the order expired that are causing all the supposed mayhem. Sure, it's less than half the number of people who left during the lockdown, but this must prove that it was the evil Republican policy causing all this death and destruction, which we already showed you isn't really happening. But CNN is CNN. And they couldn't just leave it at misleading people. They can do much, much worse than that.
Let's take a look at some of the metrics in Texas. First, from SafeCraft, just this graph of foot traffic. This is when the governor announced he was going to ease. This is when the restrictions were eased in the state of Texas. And you see, April 22nd, you just see since then, foot traffic in Texas up 54%.
Wow.
People are getting out because they're allowed to.
They're getting out because they're allowed to. Okay, well, let's look at the data for retail. That should give us a sense of what's happening. The graph here looks pretty similar to the drop in the commuting to work that we looked at before. And as you see, once again, the order to stay at home happened almost after everybody had already stayed home that was going to do it. And we started to go back out before the government order as well. Retail bottomed out right before and right around the corner of the time of the order. About 42% or so is when people, that was basically the bottom of the retail slope there. Then people started shopping again, and they started coming back. During the lockdown, about 13% of that 42 came back out. But those people aren't the ones causing the problems. Oh no, that wouldn't make sense. The governor had a stay-at-home order. It's got to be the next group that is less than half as small, or half as large, I guess. Only 6% of the people that caused the problem. Remember the framing from John King here. His direct quote, people are getting out because they're allowed to. It's just not what happened. And this is shown in all of the mobility data from every single source. But CNN still wasn't done.
Where are they going? 53% jump in hobby and toy stores as people left their house. Family clothing stores saw a spike. Shoe stores, women's clothing stores. Bars, not so much, a little bit up and down. We're told that's mostly people getting ready to reopen those bars because most are not reopened yet. Gift shops, a little bit of traffic too, but hobby stores and clothing seem to get the biggest increase here.
I can't even take this. This is legitimately unbelievable. He says that hobby stores and clothing have the biggest increase, while bars, which, by the way, are all closed, have the same increase as women's clothing stores. Now, how could that have anything to do with a government order? It busts your whole narrative. And I have to ask the question here of your basic intelligence, or at least general human curiosity here. You say that you were told that foot traffic to bars has increased by 16% because people are getting them ready, and that made sense to you? Today is more than a week after CNN's data stopped. And just today, we are hearing about a projected open date for bars in Texas. Why would they be getting them ready weeks before they even knew what the date was that they could open? It makes no sense. In addition, I have to show you how disingenuous CNN is absolutely being here. It's really incredible what they're trying to do. I've been showing you that there hasn't been a big increase in mobility. People haven't really ran out there as soon as the order came down. So how is CNN showing these skyrocketing charts then? Watch what they do. Their data comes from a firm called SafeGraph, which is monitoring all of this foot traffic. And this is entirely visual. I apologize to the podcast listeners, but I will tweet it out from Stu Does America so you can check it out. Here's CNN's version of the graph. You see the skyrocketing numbers, all these charts going basically straight up from the bottom left-hand corner of the screen to at least the mid-right and all the way up to the top. Got it? Everything is skyrocketing since this change by Texas. Now here's the actual chart from SafeGraph itself. The only difference here is that instead of all of the different categories, it's summarized under general merchandise stores. But they don't show you the whole chart. You would actually get some perspective there, and perhaps you might think that this increase in mobility couldn't possibly be the cause of a big, scary increase in the number of cases. You might also notice that mobility had been increasing for weeks and weeks before the change in the rules. So they only show you a tiny part of the chart. The entire CNN graph is just what's highlighted in this little red box that you have on your screen. And once you zoom in on that little red chunk, well then, yeah, and you can get a somewhat dramatic increase, but no, the cases are not exploding in Texas. And even if they were, there isn't enough time or movement to prove anything like the case they're trying to make. And then they're cherry-picking data and zooming in on charts to make everything look more dramatic. Look, will cases show some increase as we return to normal life? It's very possible. It probably will happen in some areas, and we need to watch it closely. It's true. This is supposed to be something that us adults look at and try to balance in an informed and sober way. But that is not what CNN is trying to do here. And they're not alone. They just happen to be the most obvious run full speed into the wall version of it. And it's infuriating. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, that right there is how you set a new record for graphs in an episode. Unless you can find a graph that disproves it.